Hey guys, how's it going? It's Leon here. Today I'm going to talk to you about how you could come to self-acceptance, acceptance of others, and also acceptance to the world around you. I'm going to share with you key ways that prevent us from coming to acceptance and thereby affecting our own psychological well-being, as well as effective and proven tools and techniques for coming to a greater acceptance. I went to an incredible seminar at the REBT Institute in New York City. It's a really world-renowned institute that teaches about psychotherapy. So I'm going to share the insights I got from this phenomenal seminar with you. So let's get started. I want to share a presentation that I made with you. It's called Self-Acceptance and World Acceptance. I want to start off with an amazing quote by a Greek philosopher called Epictetus, who stated, "Men are disturbed not by things, but by the view in which they take of them." So we may say, this person is upsetting me, this person is annoying me, this thing out there in the world is making me angry, it's making me sad. But really, it is the view in which we take of these things and of these people that are making us mad, angry, upset, or any number of emotions. So understanding this concept helps us come to a greater acceptance of ourselves and of the world around us. Let me get more into this. So a good question to ask is, what is acceptance? What we think acceptance is that we have to force ourselves to accept the things as they are. And that could be a really stressful and pressuring kind of process that we put upon ourselves. But acceptance is not forceful. Acceptance is really acknowledgement, the acknowledgement of the situation. And the thing is, acknowledging is very different from embracing. So we might think acceptance is about embracing the negative as if we love what is negative. No, you don't have to do that. Acknowledging is more like coming to a light awareness, a mindfulness of the situation, very different from forcefulness. So we may tell ourselves, I should accept the world. I should let go of the situation. I have to stop caring about my ex, for example. And we think that is what leads to self-acceptance. But that is not what self-acceptance is. Acceptance is not only the acceptance of the situation, but it's also accepting our own emotional response to that situation, of our own state of mind in that situation. We have the right to our feelings. So I want to help you see that acceptance is more than just acceptance of the situation, which is important, but is also accepting of what occurs within us, the emotional state that we have of that situation. And maybe we have negative thoughts and we have negative feelings, but we could come to acceptance of that first. And when we could come to acceptance of our negative thoughts and feelings, it's easier to accept the situation. We do not accept the world by making a demand of the world. And this is what is called demandingness. We say things like should, ought to, have to, need to kind of statements. And this leads to extreme categorizations of ourselves, of others, as well as the world. These things either should or should not be, ought to be or ought not to be. So this is what I mean by extreme categorization. There's three different things we make demands out of. We make demands of the self, of others, and a world. And examples would be, For example, for making demands of ourselves, I should be perfect. And a demand of others would be others should be wearing their mask during the coronavirus pandemic. Um, a demand that we make of the world is that the world ought to be fair. So I'm not going to dispute this because what I am after is the wording itself. So I believe it's better that people wear masks. But when we make a demand of it, when we say should, that's when we start to drive ourselves crazy with our own thoughts. When we tell ourselves we should be perfect, we drive ourselves crazy to make ourselves perfect. The consequences of demanding is that it leads to a non-acceptance of reality. It actually impedes us on our goals. So we think that when we tell ourselves, I should be perfect, that's going to drive us towards doing better and better. But this is actually not the case. It impedes us on our goals because it provides so much pressure. It's kind of hard to think straight. The next thing it does is that it is rigid and it's dogmatic. It does not reflect the world really that well because it's very black and white. As I said, should and should not be. And often these must, should, ought to be statements, they are in our unconscious. So we're not really explicitly saying, I should be perfect, or others should be wearing masks, or the world should be fair. But if you were to analyze the thoughts that pop into your head when you're in a negative state, when you're going into a negative spiral, you will usually find there's a should ought statement that belies it. So a good way to counter this should ought statement is to ask yourself, where is it written that it must be the case, that it should be the case, that it ought to be the case? And we find that really these are our own thoughts. So as Epictetus says, we're not disturbed by things, we're disturbed by our thought of things. It's not written out there that something should be the case. It's actually something that we came up here. And by realizing that, we could own our own thoughts about things. So I'm going to teach you a more flexible reality-based approach that supports our goals. The first thing that I want to tell you is that when you are to frame the should, ought to, or have to be statement in terms of preferences, as in I want to, I prefer to, I desire to, it makes it much better. So something I like to tell people to do is to write a have to statement. So we could go back up to the slide. Think of a should statement, or ought to, or have to, or must statement, or need to statement in regards to yourself, in regards to others, and the world. So just like the examples that I provided, like I should be perfect, or others must be wearing masks, think about how you may be making a should or ought to statement. And if you can't, you could also just make up one for as the sake of exercise. And then after you write that down, turn that into I want to, I prefer to. I want, or I prefer that I am perfect, or I desire that I am perfect. I prefer that people wear masks. And what people often say is that this often softens the statement. It makes it less pressuring. And it's reflective reality because it's acknowledging that this thought comes from us. It comes from our preference. So the first way that we make a demand using these must or should or ought to statements is by catastrophizing. We say, it is terrible, it is awful, it is horrible. So it is terrible that I did not get an interview. It is awful that I missed the train stop. Or it is horrible when my computer slows down. The thing about using these statements is that it's assuming that what's happening to you is more than 100% bad. And that's not the case for most things, not for 95% of things that happen in our lives in which we're saying it is terrible, it is awful, it is horrible. So I want you to take the time, and you could pause the video if that would help you, to write a "it is terrible, it is awful, it is horrible, ... statement for yourself. And then turn the statement into "it is bad" and "it is misfortunate." I want to provide you with a caveat. If you had trauma in your life or anything that's on that level of experience, this is not advisable, because understandably that would feel terrible and awful and horrible to have experience. I'm talking about things that happen 95% of the time in our lives. Our computer slows down, we miss the train stop, we treat it as terrible, awful, horrible. But in these cases, it is really more reflective of reality and more accepting of reality to say it is bad or it is misfortunate. The second way we make a demand, we make these must or should ought to statements, is in terms of our own frustration intolerance. So what is frustration intolerance? It's when we say, I can't stand it. It is unbearable. It is too hard. So when you catch yourself making this statement, you could ask yourself, what is it that you can't stand? You can't stand what? Because often we are very vague when we make this kind of statement. I can't stand it. What does it refer to? And again, we don't necessarily make these statements explicitly. Often when you find yourself frustrated, you could reframe your thoughts in terms of this statement, like, I can't stand it when my computer slows down. You may not be literally thinking that thought, but that's basically what you are thinking. The thing is, we often think that we are kind of like a cup, that we have this much that we could tolerate, and once we get to the brim, we can't tolerate anymore. That's why we might say something like, we had it up to here. And we think there's a quota for our own hassles, but actually we are not like a cup. You could actually increase your ability to tolerate frustration over time and make your cup bigger. So again, think about examples that apply to yourself or others in the world. What is it that you can't stand about yourself or others or the world? So maybe I can't stand a certain habit of myself, something I may not stand about others. I can't stand it when others are acting stupid. After you make that statement, after you identify it, then change it to, I don't like it, but I could stand it, or it is misfortunate, but I could stand it. And that is more in line with reality. And it teaches you that you could handle frustration, that you could be getting upset or angry, but even when that happens, you could accept those feelings. And when you accept those feelings, you could still go on with the task. So for me, I love to do creative activities, but I am no Mozart. Mozart could just sit down and have a whole entire symphony in his head while he's playing cards, and then write down that symphony onto a sheet of paper perfectly with ease. When it comes to creative activities, I tend to have a lot of creative frustration that occurs. But the thing is, I could stand the creative frustration, and I could allow myself to be angry and annoyed to a certain extent. So what people believe is that things in life should come easy. So this is the implicit should behind the I can't stand it. So again, you could develop a higher frustration tolerance. Hey guys, stay tuned for part 2. I'll be talking about specific ways you could develop self-acceptance, and also helpful and simple questions you could ask yourself to help you problem solve when you're stuck in a negative rut. And if you like this video, do me a favor and subscribe.